This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring a discussion on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's role in the making of the Indian Constitution. The participants are Professor Sushma Yadav, constitutional expert and Vice Chancellor, Haryana Central University, and Rajesh Lake, AIR correspondent.
The first President of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, praised the services rendered by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar while constituting the Indian Constitution, and I quote, "I have carefully watched the day-to-day activities from the presidential seat. Therefore, I appreciate more than others with how much dedication and vitality this task has been carried out by the drafting committee and by the chairman, Dr. Bhim Rao Ambedkar in particular." And this is what we are discussing today as to what was the contribution of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in making of Constitution. So, Professor, would you please start with the contributions, particularly to do with the fundamental rights?
Dr. B.R. Ambedkar can easily be called and is usually called the architect of Indian Constitution. And not because he was the chairman of the drafting committee, but because of his seminal contribution in framing, in giving a shape, and in giving the soul of the Constitution, which lies in the fundamental rights. Because the fundamental rights are so comprehensive in Indian Constitution that with one stroke of pen, they have given so many rights to the Indian people, including women who had to fight for their rights in many of the so-called or developed countries, that he can easily be said to be a great liberal, parliamentarian, republican constitutionalist. So if we say what was his contribution, I would say when we call India a republic, when we call India a democratic parliamentary system, when we call India a sovereign with huge fundamental rights like justice, liberty, equality, which are again very comprehensive because it's not merely justice, it's social, economic and political justice which are ensured by the fundamental rights, and I'll come to the details later maybe, and liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith and worship, which in fact is very, very exceptional because by ensuring this, we gave freedom of thought, we gave freedom of expression, we gave freedom of belief, we gave freedom of faith and worship, which at times has given birth to certain conflicting tussles between the groups of citizens, but they do ensure a huge libertarian regime also in terms of rights of the individual or rights of the citizen. Then it also talks about equality and equality of status and opportunity. And if we go to fundamental rights, Article 14, 15, 16, 17, and I may give you the details of these rights also because the Article 14 talks about equal rights and opportunities in all spheres, including political, economic and social. Article 15 talks about it prohibits discrimination on the ground of sex, which means the fair sex or women are given equal treatment before the law. Article 15.3 goes beyond equality, which is procedural. It talks about substantial equality and their affirmative discrimination in favor of women. And it also in favor of the depressed classes. Then it talks about rights of minorities. It talks about right against exploitation and begar. So in one stroke, it tried to address lots of social ills which were there before independence and continued for some time later, after independence also. But Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar tried to give a constitutional framework where these social ills will be dealt with and the Indian citizens will be able to have a life which is of dignity and which also protects the integrity of the nation.
So I would like to quote Dr. Yadav here what the New York Times wrote. The whole world acknowledges him as a leader of untouchables, but few realize his permanent impact on the constitutional setup of India, which you so beautifully elucidated a while back. Coming now to the second aspect of his contribution, which could do with the concept of socio-economic justice, as envisioned by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, is very well reflected in the directive principles of the state policy. Yeah. Would you please elaborate, particularly the part 4 of the Constitution?
Dr. Ambedkar had a very, very tough task before him. He was presenting a constitution before a constituent assembly which was enamored by many, many ideologies of that time and many ideals of that time. And I'm sure you will recollect, he presented the objectives resolution of Nehru, which was Nehru's dream, basically, or idea, but he presented it before the Constituent Assembly. But still he tried to make sure that all the securities which he wanted for the Indian citizens should be there in the Constitution. He wanted right to education at that time, which could not be possible at that time because many members of the Constituent Assembly, in fact, said it is not possible. The state cannot really afford it at this time. And so he put many of them which couldn't be kept in chapter 3 in chapter 4. And if you look at them, they talk about socialistic pattern also, although he didn't keep the word socialism in the preamble. They talk about equal means of livelihood and equal pay for equal work. They talk about human conditions of work and maternity relief. And let me say here that maternity relief or the maternity leave which Indian women have enjoyed in India was basically his handiwork. And his handiwork was important. Equal means of livelihood and equal pay for equal work. He talked about the power of Panchayati Raj. He talked about human conditions of work. He talked about the state to promote with special care the educational and economic interests of weaker sections of people and to protect them from social injustice and all forms of exploitation. Had he got a chance, he would have kept it in the fundamental rights, but he kept in Article 46 and then Article 47, the state to raise the level of nutrition because he knew there was hunger, there was malnutrition, there were problems of child education, there was problems of child labor, begar, etc. So he talked about the state's efforts to raise the level of nutrition and standard of living of its people and especially weaker sections of people and to protect them from social injustice and all forms of exploitation. So if you look at the part 4 or chapter 4 of the Constitution, talks about all those provisions which ensure a life of dignity and justice to all sections of people in India, including women, including the weaker sections. And I like to pay my tribute to Dr. Ambedkar because in that given scenario, he tried his best to give as many rights or ensure as many rights in the future India or in the years to come, which were required, in his opinion, for a dignified living for people of India.
Professor Yadav, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was also a strong advocate of the parliamentary form of government right from the inception of the Government of India Act of 1935.
Yes.
He firmly believed that the parliamentary system of government alone can usher in an egalitarian society through the application of the principles of social democracy. Having said that, would you elaborate on the preamble of the Indian Constitution which was drafted by Dr. Ambedkar?
Dr. Ambedkar was a leader with vision. He was a philosopher with critique about existing ills. He was a thinker. He was a social reformer. He was a freedom fighter. All these roles got clubbed when the preamble of the Constitution was written, I would say, because he said it is the soul of the Constitution. And where he says, we the people of India, that is where the parliamentary democracy or the parliamentary system get a shape or gets a form in the preamble itself. So it's not anybody, I or the Constituent Assembly members, but it is about we the people of India having solemnly resolved, which means it was people's resolution to give this shape to the Constitution of India, where it was sovereign, it was democratic, it was republic. And I'm talking about the original Constitution, which Dr. Ambedkar had at that time got adopted in the Constituent Assembly. Later on, of course, as you know, we added 2 more words, socialist and secular, but they were debated at that time and Dr. Ambedkar did not keep them or agreed not to keep them there. And I remember secular and socialist both had their own problems and that's why he did not keep those words. But then it says, and to secure. So democratic and republic means there was adult suffrage, universal adult franchise, voting right to women also, or voting right to all the people, and irrespective of caste, creed, and class, whatever. And it was one man, one vote, which he said was crucial for ensuring the equal rights to all individuals and republic. There would be nobody ruling us just because of his birth or her birth, but they have to be elected. And he put them in the preamble so that every government of the times to come would really abide by them and go according to them. Therefore, when he ultimately gave his last lecture in the Constituent Assembly, they were very, very remarkable words where he said, "We are entering a stage of or a state of contradictions where I've ensured political democracy or we've ensured political democracy, but socio-economic democracy is yet to come." And those provisions were given, as you rightly said before, in Part 4 or Chapter 4 of the Constitution. But I would like to remind you here, he warned against certain things. One was, Indians are fond of hero worshipping. Let them not indulge in that, because in parliamentary democracy, nobody should be worshipped like a god or semi-god. They are individuals and they are servants of the people, and they should be taken like that.
Professor Yadav, just last question on Dr. Ambedkar advocating his economic doctrine of state socialism in the draft constitution. And he was also par excellence spokesman of the ignored humanity, the workers, small peasants,
Yes.
and landless laborers. If you could elaborate on that a bit.
He was the first Indian to pursue a doctorate in economics abroad. In long years, we didn't know about his specialization in that. And therefore, I would say it was his training in economics that attracted him to a different kind of growth and development in India. And he didn't want complete capitalism. He didn't want complete socialism, but state socialism for some time and cooperative growth or cooperative development in India, where he thought that all citizens of India would have access to resources and the agriculture would become synchronized because land reform was most important and small landholds were critical or crucial in stopping the growth of those who were depending on this. And they were the people who didn't have any voice, and they were the people who didn't have any resources. So Baba Saheb Ambedkar, in fact, was a voice for them as he started Mook Nayak and Bahishkrit Bharat. So he was speaking about the Indians who were not part of the mainstream, and he was also speaking about those who cannot speak for themselves. So he wanted state socialism in the form the state would provide basic amenities, will look after the agriculture and small land holdings and provide the means, and also will encourage the craft and skills which Indians had and provide them amenities or markets, which I think now the government is trying to do in a very beautiful way by developing or encouraging small enterprises and skill formation. He wanted it at that time. But the means to attain those ideals are still not completely there. I would really like to remember his words because he was the man who talked about RBI. He was the man who talked about employment exchange. He was the man who talked about the ITIs, which are there for skill formation. He talked about the abolition, or he opposed Article 370 at that time. He changed working hours in India from 14 hours to 8 hours, which was really inhuman before, and the colonial system had done, but he reduced it to 8 hours. And then he also fought for 3 years to get the Comprehensive Hindu Code Bill passed, which gave several rights to women. Had he had his say, there would have been a uniform civil code at that time.
Professor Yadav, the attainment of genuine social equality is, of course, a gradual process, but it was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar who set us on the path with a written constitution based on the philosophy, considering its people at the center. Thank you so much for throwing light on Dr. Ambedkar's role in making of the Indian Constitution, Professor Sushma Yadav. Thank you very much.
Thank you and namaskar.
You were listening to a discussion on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's role in the making of the Indian Constitution. The participants were Professor Sushma Yadav, constitutional expert and Vice Chancellor, Haryana Central University, and Rajesh Lake, AIR correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsgtalks@gmail.com.